Welcome to the Tracking Connections podcast, and thanks for listening.
We feature voices from around the world sharing stories of working intentionally with deep nature connection in ways that transform lives, families, projects, and communities. I'm Sarah.
I'm Aiden.
And I'm John.
And we are your hosts from Living Connection First. Welcome to episode 16 of Tracking Connections podcast. This is Aiden.
This is Sarah. We are here with Josh Lane, as well as John. Josh was a mentor of mine for tracking in my very green years of tracking. So I'm really excited to have him here and have a conversation. How about you, John?
Well, yeah. Everybody, when they heard I was going to talk to Josh today, send Josh my greetings. Sure, was saying, I love Josh. Yeah, we all love Josh. We're really happy to connect with you, Josh. Thanks for being willing to join us for Tracking Connections podcast today. Josh and I go back a ways. I think, when Josh was 16, his mentor back at the Vermont Wilderness School, Mark Morey, was like, hey, I have this young guy. He's super motivated and he's really moving on this whole nature connection journey thing. And, maybe you could have a conversation with him. So I'm like, yeah, I'd love to. I love helping people who are totally stoked and rocking on the journey. And, Josh and I had a lot of those conversations, and then he ended up coming out. He was going to participate in a program, but then I was like, Josh, why don't you help teach it? So he ended up teaching with me at the Institute of Nature Awareness for a long time. And then we worked together for years at H. Shields Institute. And we've done a ton of stuff together. And it's really great to reconnect with you, Josh. And we'll tell you more about Josh's book at the end here, but he's got this great book, Conscious Nature, and he's just done tons of research. And he just keeps pushing the edge of what we're all excited about. So Josh is obviously, he finished that naturalist training program years and years ago and went really far on the holistic tracking program and ended up being a tracking mentor, as Sarah just said, and just love having Josh around. It's wonderful to be with you, Josh.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation to be here today.
Mm-hmm.
Super excited for our conversation.
Well, I want to ask, I know you've done a load of outer tracking. Wildlife tracking, deep nature connection, out there exploring, learning, watching, always probably still growing and learning things around you and the world around you. But I think you've gone way into the inner world, like tracking the nervous system, tracking how the brain works and how the nervous system function and perception works and how this all ties in, and what we might call in a general way, inner tracking. What are your reflections on what you've been researching, Josh?
Yeah, thanks. Well, that's really what led me into tracking, I think, was that desire to understand this world and my role in it. And I had a deep sacred question, you could say, that was set at a young age, of just that perennial question of what the heck is going on here in this world? What are we doing here? And that sort of mystical bent to my nature. And I started getting into yoga as a teenager. I was kind of that skateboard rebel youth, disaffected youth in the suburbs, looking for something more meaningful than what I was seeing around me in day-to-day life. That led me into meditation, going really deep into Raja Yoga. And that brought me a great sense of peace. But there was always this thing of stepping out the door and seeing, even in the suburbs, there's some of the trails in the forest, and wondering what was going on there. And when I walked, I felt that peace, but I didn't feel that connection yet. And so that led me on this journey into tracking to answer that question of connecting with place there. But as I went deeper into tracking and in our mentorship, I started meeting these moments of initiation, I would call them, where, you speak to this quite eloquently in some of the audio recordings about, you go to your sit spot and you meet these rites of passage of fear and cold and dark and wet and all these things. And then you start to go deeper into that stillness and that power of meeting that place with stillness. And what I found was there are these thresholds that happen where you start to tap into parts of yourself that you weren't aware of when you started the journey, these aspects of instinct and intuition and synchronicity. And I started to really encounter these moments of realization that we have things moving inside of us on a deep level that are interacting with our surroundings, and they're defining that sphere of interaction. They're defining these synchronicities. They're defining what we notice or what we don't notice. and on the visionary path, they're also impacting what we feel like we can do, how we can step up to say yes to our vision and contribute to a bigger impact at a time right now when I feel like we are in need of that genius that's inside of each of us, and saying yes to that in the biggest way we can, to uplift our connection with nature and with each other on a global scale. And so inner tracking to me is that interface of how we meet the world, how we meet ourselves, and how do we say yes to choosing a path of the most peace, the most passion and purpose, and bringing that forward. So you could say tracking opened a big can of worms, and I've been on the trail of that ever since.
That's really cool. What are some of the lessons you've learned? I appreciate your life. It's kind of a lifelong, really, going back to your teen years, what are some of the big ahas that you've taken from this?
Yeah, this is going on over 25, 28 years now. I forget how old I am now. Once I hit the 40s, I stopped counting. But, the big one, I think what haunted me for a long time was in one of the nature connection units that you put out a long time ago. You mentioned some research from the University of Chicago with that infamous kitten study where they raised these kittens, and one set of kittens was raised with just vertical stripes around them all the time. And the other group of kittens was raised with the horizontal stripes. And when they took them out of that confined environment, the ones raised with the horizontal stripes, they would see those. If they saw a chair with a horizontal stripe, they would know it was there. But the vertical legs they'd never encountered, they'd bump into them, and vice versa for the other group. So they were literally not perceiving something that was right in front of them in their environment, but because they were not conditioned and connected to that pattern, they could not perceive it or interact with it. It was as if it wasn't there. And I remember reading that, and that really struck me as speaking to what's going on, I think, in the human condition in general, that we have this vast world that we're part of, and it requires the input, the guidance, and in many cases, the guidance of a mentor or somebody who's aware of that, and particularly a nature connection, to help one to connect their senses meaningfully with this richness of patterns and lives that we're part of as a keystone species on this earth. So when we connect with nature, and a mentor helps us to do that through questions, as you've done for me, and as I strive to pass forward for others, that those questions literally prime our brain to then reach out. And I looked at the neurobiology of this priming effect. And, you can demonstrate this easily right now. If you imagine a red stop sign in front of you, right, and really see the redness of that shape, and just picture that for a moment. And then you look around the room for a moment, and probably anything that's red will jump right out at you. And that is priming in action. What was there before, just like the kitten bumping into that bar that it couldn't see on the chair, the red was right there, but it was in the background of your awareness, right? And by priming it, you use the frontal cortex of your brain, right, to bring that image into your mental chalkboard. You draw on your sensory memory of the color red, and then it becomes present. And now you know that it's there. It's in the forefront of your awareness. And so I think what I perceive is that mentoring is the act of bringing those connections into the forefront of our awareness and making them meaningful, things that used to be invisible. And there's a great saying in the Tai Chi, it might be the Tai Chi classics: at first, that which is subtle becomes noticeable, and then over time that becomes obvious. So we're moving on this spectrum from things that are invisible to subtle, to then we start to notice them, and then they become obvious, and yet they've been there the whole time. And I think that's the power of mentoring, is that we're able to reconnect ourselves and future generations, youth, people of all ages, to the magic and wonder of this world that we're part of. And we can then take better care of it and playing our role as human beings here.
That's really beautiful. I totally agree. I want to go back to something that you said in the beginning of the conversation. You came from a meditation background and a yoga background, and you said you had the peace, but you didn't have the connection. So could you say a little bit more about that, having the meditative kind of yogic experience versus a silent mind in a deep nature connection context?
Thank you. Yeah, that's an important distinction I found. The peace opens up the potential for those connections, because when we become present, and I always say there's 3 stages that I define. The first one is presence. If we don't have presence, we can't really be with what's there. We could be on the most beautiful beach somewhere on an amazing vacation, but if our mind is in the future at some meeting we have to attend next week, we're not noticing all that stuff, all that amazing beauty. So the silence, the presence brings us into the potential of connecting with what's there. When we do that, we move into phase 2, which I call observation, right? We can then observe with that silent mind by being present and attending to what's here right now. We can start to track at that point, right? And then when we start to track things, we can come into attunement over time, where we're feeling what's going on in a deeper way. We're in sync with it because we're connected. And I think that silence is a powerful doorway, but if we leave it there, right? If we just leave it at that level of silence, we're not taking it to its full potential of where we can go with it. It's sort of a doorway, but I think a lot of people don't realize there's a further thing that we can do. We can walk through that door and experience something once we have that quiet mind. And that's where nature connection both can bring us to that. And then there's so much to discover within us and around us when we step through that doorway.
Cool. And stepping through that doorway into awareness of nature, priming ourselves to see the things that we weren't aware of before. How might that relate to vision? You spoke of vision, that difference between staying in the silent mind and just staying in the silent mind, which, a lot of spiritual traditions kind of emphasize that just pure peace and silence. I've heard someone say that we can become addicted to peace. Right, that we just only want to be in that place. So we cross this threshold into nature and an awareness in nature, like you talked about the cold and the initiations at your sit spot. So how does that relate to vision in your experience?
Well, leading into that, I would say nature gives us a kind of grit that we discover inside of ourselves, because as we face those things, we learn that we can. Right? We learn that we can face those things and move through them and not avoid them if they need to be, faced. We can embrace them even. And in that, in order to do that, we have to find a passion inside of ourselves. We have to find enough of a motivation and a reason to want to do that in the first place. For me, that was discovering, well, first the wonder and beauty around me, and then all these lives that I didn't even know were right there, like seeing the just amazing golden colors of the underside of a flicker's wing and tail that flies up, and I'd heard that bird so many times, I had no idea about this amazing being that was making that sound around me. So there's that level of discovery, but then there's also the discovery of what's possible with our intuition and connecting with animals and with birds and other elements in nature. I found is a powerful way to realize the potential we have inside of us. And that leads into vision. I believe that combination of grit and then passion, because we start to pursue questions in our nature connection that we're passionate about. And that's something I really appreciate, John, that you've helped me to do over the years, is to follow my passions and ask those deep questions and go there, because you kind of got to go there, and having somebody that sees that in you and then goes there with you, like, and muses on it and wonders about it and shares their own experiences, it helps you to validate that for yourself, that, hey, other people have experienced this too, perhaps. And, I wonder where I can take this. I wonder what this is teaching me on a deeper level. And when you find those resources inside yourself, when you have intuitive experiences, when you have deep, meaningful synchronicities and things like that, it puts a certain perspective within you. I find a perspective that gives you a hope and a faith and a sense of, I can follow my vision. Like, I don't know sometimes how I'm going to do it. Like, I don't always know how I'm going to find that next track, but then I know it's there. Right. And I know if I attend to it, I'm going to find it. If I follow my instinct and my intuition, I'm going to be led to what I need to be led to. And that's where the power of the visionary comes in, because often we can't, we might see an end goal, but between here and there, we don't know how we're going to get there many times, but if we can just take one step, find that next track, we know we're going to get there. And by honing our intuition in nature, it gives us this really powerful toolkit and resource inside ourselves to do that. So that's what I'm really focused on is a commitment to helping people awaken and realize those resources that are inside them, as well as their passions. And then when those blockage points come up, or we hit our old patterns and our old limiting beliefs, that we can actually move through those and follow that trail, follow that passion and that vision. So I think it all weaves together for me.
All right, I'm sold. Let's say I don't know the first thing about getting out in nature. This is kind of a new journey for me. Where should I start?
There's this fine edge. Mark Morey speaking. John mentioned Mark Morey, one of my early mentors, and he did a lot with Outward Bound. And he used that model of there's perceived risk on one end, and then there's real risk, right? And often we think, there might be more risk than there is. So part of it is finding where we're comfortable and starting in really easy ways. Because if we go too far on that spectrum in our experience, where we start to feel so uncomfortable that we stop connecting. So that's one thing I've found. Advice I would give for people is figuring out where your edge with that is. What's the real risk? We always talk about learning the hazards, right? Like learning about poison oak, like, or where I am, poison ivy, we have it in the yard. So I'm teaching my 4-year-old, how do you identify it? What happens if you touch it, and working on that awareness, or with the yellow jackets. So knowing kind of what's there that you have to deal with. Ticks are a big one, like in most places in the US. Basic things like that, go on the CDC website, learn about that. But then once you've done your due diligence just with a few basic things like that, having a simple practice, like if it has to start with sitting on your porch or in the backyard or at a local park on a bench, and you feel comfortable doing that, get out there and start with 5 minutes a day, or 5 minutes 3 times a week, or for me, I like to stick my head out the door a few times during the day. If I'm stuck inside working on the computer at lunch, I'm going to make it a point to go out for 2 to 5 minutes, really get into all my senses one at a time, methodically, but just relax, kind of soaking in nature like a sponge. I'm just being there. I'm attending. I'm soaking it in, and I'm breathing in the goodness of nature into me for that 5 minutes. And when I leave that, I feel recharged. And if you can get that to 12 to 15 minutes where you continually come back into the moment, and instead of a mantra in your head where you're, saying something mentally, it's a mantra of here I am in this moment with my senses. Now, if you can come back to that over and over for 12 to 15 minutes, just if you get distracted, that's fine. It happens. It's going to happen to everybody. But if we catch ourselves, we go, oh yeah, I'm getting distracted, just like in regular meditation. And just come back, invite myself back into the moment. What's going on? Listen, look, smell, touch, feel the breeze. Do that for 12 to 15 minutes. You're going to experience a shift in your physiology. You're going to go into alpha brainwaves, and you're going to get the relaxation response, which moves through your whole body. And I talk about the research on this in the book, Conscious Nature. There's a Harvard researcher named Herbert Benson, and he's done tons of studies. He was the one that found the relaxation response, that when you do a meditation for about 12 to 15 minutes, you trigger this, literally sheds all the stress out of your body. You feel it go through you like a wave, deep relaxation. And now they've found, his team at Harvard have found that this works on an epigenetic level. And if you do this regularly over a period of, it's not even a long period, I forget what it is, but it's like just for a couple of months of regular meditation for 10, 20 minutes a day, you change about 1,200 epigenetic triggers in your body and reset them into a more healthy pattern. So you're literally, nature can partner with you to change yourself from the inside out and get into this really good space. So just, attending to the senses that way would be my simple answer, Aiden, on that question.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really, really cool. And for somebody who lives in a more urban environment, you're not saying I need to go into the wilderness, right? Like if I'm in my backyard and there's some trees and some birds around, maybe there's an occasional car going by or a plane going over, that still counts.
That counts. It's about being in the moment. Nature is everywhere. I've had some of my funnest experiences in the city and most unexpected nature encounters, and it's available everywhere. Even looking at the blue sky, gazing up, and then feeling the breeze that are coming down the streets and the alleyways. But it's about that quality. And I invite folks who are here listening, to do this right now. And of course, if you're driving, be careful, but of just feeling the air against your face for a moment. Just feeling it. It might be moving, it might be very subtle, but what's the sensation? Right? Feeling the crown of your head meeting the sky. That's a powerful one. Just this feeling of the scalp and the energy there at the crown, and sensing this expanse, right, of the sky everywhere, touching the crown of your head. And then also taking a deep breath. And as you exhale, letting go, sinking into the structure of your being, of your body, letting go into the gravity of the earth, feeling the earth holding you, relaxing into that for a moment. Right? And just being in the presence of yourself between the earth and the sky, and just sensing around you what's happening around you and inside of you. That's it right there. It's that simple. That opens up presence.
What I'm gathering from this is that the connection here, there's when I'm in nature and connecting to nature, but then I'm sort of bringing this back into my, we'll call it my modern life, right? Or if we were going to reference grandfather Ingwe, right? He talks about the idea of us living fully in two worlds. So we're going out and being in that natural world, and then we're bringing this back into our modern world. And if I'm hearing you correctly, what I'm hearing is that I'm then able to take this presence and this sort of calm state into my music or into my spreadsheet or into my meeting or whatever it is, my cooking, and that sort of awakening. Not only am I waking my senses and being more present to what's there in front of me and able to perceive more accurately, but I'm also in a more grounded state that allows me to actually interact more effectively. Is that what you're getting at?
That's it. It's giving us our baseline, to use one of John's words, the baseline of our natural rhythm. That it's so easy to get out of that with all the to-do lists and things we face, rushing from one thing to another. And when we cultivate this, we start to carry that with us more and more and find that natural place inside of us. It's just our own rhythm. When we tap into that, we tap into a power inside of ourselves. It lets us be attentive. We become more aware of our own needs. We track our own motivations, things that might have gone more unconscious in the past that are driving our behavior. We start to become aware of it because we start to feel it moving in that silence. We also start to tune into that in the people around us we're interacting with. We can be more compassionate. We can be more understanding, have a little bit more of a pause in some of our interactions. We can ask some good questions. All the things that come from tracking apply. I think about my dad. He would often tell me as a kid, I was not into math, and I would struggle with math class sometimes. And he'd say, well, they say that when you do your math skills, it transfers somehow into other areas of your life. You always planted that seed, and it never made sense as a kid. But I think about that now, and I see that with tracking skills, that all these nature skills, they wake up these parts of us, and then we have that capacity in anything that we're doing to ask those questions, to be present, and to bring that quality of attention and awareness into the process.
It's cool that you bring up math, because I actually think math and music and tracking all have an interesting thing in common, right? Which is you're presented with this mystery and there is an answer, right? Like Tom Brown always says, how many different ways could this track have been made, right? And the answer is one, the way it was made. And same thing is true with music, right? Something happened. There was a melody there. Same thing is true with math. There is an answer. And so that idea of being able to more accurately perceive what's there in front of you to help you find that answer. I appreciate that connection very much.
And I to sort of eat my own cake, or I don't know what the phrase is on that, but take your own medicine, so to speak. I just took a psychological statistics class after not having done math deliberately for 25 years. And I used what I learned from tracking to succeed in that, and do well with it, and kind of prove to myself that, I could do it, and I did it. So yeah, these things help us in so many domains of our life.
Well, I think back, I think it's now almost 30 years that I've known you, Josh, since you were a teenager. And I'm imagining that's true. You don't even know how old you are, but you're over 40. I know that. And I imagine a few years over 40. When I think about, I want to call it the weight of a legacy, passed on to me by the way Tom Brown mentored me as a boy, and always feeling like I could never pay him back, but I have to pay it forward, right? And the other thing that I think of is, okay, I'm now in my 60s and I'm not going to be here forever. and how will this move through time? Because the benefit that you and Aiden and Sarah are speaking to is it's not something you can get from like a one-day workshop, you know? It's like these relationships that you build over time, right? The relationship with the flicker, the northern flicker, the woodpecker that Josh was mentioning earlier, or you know what you were saying with your young boy Danny, who by the way has the same birthday as me, which I think is really cool. You know, we start with the hazards, and that would you know basically comes from Ingwe, right? Our elder Ingwe, who I met in 1983, and you know he says we have to teach these young people to be aware of the hazards and to learn how to interact with them in the way that you were describing with Danny. Because what will happen from that is that they'll develop common sense, right? They'll know. But there's something else beyond that, right? So since I was very young, I had this terrible fear of spiders because I would have these nightmares. I mean, terrible nightmares about spiders. And they would wake me up and I'd scream and make my parents come in because my whole bed was full of spiders, you know, and they'd take the sheets off. And of course, there was no spiders. But I just had this, like, you know, I guess you call it arachnophobia, but it was really intense, you know. And Tom, when he caught on to that, you know, when I was about 10 years old and he found out that I had this terrible fear of spiders, he's like, let's go catch a spider and then you keep it in a terrarium with all the other things that you keep and develop a really good relationship with it and get to know this being and you'll lose your fear of spiders. Well, the hilarious thing was we caught a sheet web spider, you know, that had this little tunnel that goes down in and, you know, I'd drop a cricket on it, would run out and grab the cricket and pull it back down. Well, my nightmares got more vivid and more creepy. Like the more I got to know about spiders, the more vivid my nightmares got. So there's this other kind of archetypal thing going on too. You know, there's something like deep in our subconscious. So we moved out to this house, Sarah and I, about 3 years ago, and it just happens to be the epicenter of black widows in the universe. I mean, I've never seen more black widows around this house, in this house. If you leave a piece of furniture for 2 months in one spot and you don't dust under it, you're going to find black widow webs. And then there's a black widow there hanging out. And I'm just like, wow, they're actually living in the house with me now. You know, and when I was preparing a training pathway called the Natural Mind Journey, I decided to pick 5 hazards to share. How would I build a relationship with hazards here where I live? You know, and one of them was the Western rattlesnake, and one of them was the black widow. One of them was wildfire. One of them was sneaker waves, because here on the Pacific Coast, a lot of people, I mean, a lot of people every year get swept off the rocks and go out to sea, never to be seen again. And that it's sad, but it's like no relationship with the ocean, no understanding of the waves. You know, that's the hazard. And I, at first, when started to realize there was black widows pretty much everywhere around here, at first they freaked me out. And then I got this cool thing on Amazon where you could squeeze the trigger and these little fibers open up like a little, it's like, gives you like a foot and a half of distance between your hand and the spider. And you can pull the trigger, open up those little fibers, and then put it around the spider and let go of the trigger, and it closes on the spider and doesn't hurt it. So you can bring the spider out and release it. Well, I think I did that like 75 times from this house. And in the beginning, I would just get like in my body, you know, just doing it. And the more I did it, and then Willa and Finch started doing it, you know, and that's how many black widows we're talking about. The thing that happened recently for me was this. One day I walked over and here's a black widow hanging in this one storage area. And it's just kind of right in my face. And I'm like, oh, hi, you know, and I reached and got my things and I walked away. And I realized the relationship developed to the point where the fear is gone. And now they feel like friends. Like there was a total transition from that deep psychological fear that has no basis, you know, real risk versus perceived risk, right? To developing the relationship, developing the understanding, developing some kind of, I won't even call it competence. I do admit that the spider catcher thing, you know, gave me peace of mind. And finally, to this place where, like, now I don't even want to bother them because I feel like they're kin. You know, do you have reflections on that deepening journey?
Yeah, thank you for that. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny. We've been looking up the Black Widow a lot in the field guide and the Golden Guide lately, me and Danny. And he's just totally fascinated by it. He always wants to look it up and see that one. It's so interesting, the fascination with that. And then I've told him some of your stories, about the thick webs and everything, and catching them with that spider catcher.
Well, it gets even funnier because my son Aiden named his little black Prius the Black Widow, and he put a little red hourglass on the back of this little black car. It's hilarious.
Oh my goodness. And that sums it up. It reminds me of the idea of exposure therapy in a way, where you're just to face a fear, they have you encounter something again and again until you see what's real about it versus the projection in the mind. And I think that's what this story for me points out, is that idea of, yes, we're always part of nature. No matter what we do, we're an extension and part of nature, but it's become possible for us to live now in our own insulated bubble of human created media and ideas and environments. And I think that's where that fear starts to get promoted within, is if we stay in that bubble and we don't reach out our connector feelers, to what's real, like you did with the spider. You reached out and made that connection again and again and again, and you started to realize something from that. And I think that's the opportunity, the challenge, and the opportunity of the moment. And it's what the nature connection journey as a whole points at, is that we have the potential to get past our fears, whether it's the fear of a spider that we haven't encountered, or, on a cultural level, fear of like person we've never talked with before that may have a very different view than us of how we relate. And yet we have that potential inside of ourselves where we can make a real connection and get past barriers of fear, barriers of prejudice, barriers of disconnection. And so I think nature shows us that that's possible, and a way to do that by making real connection happen, offering ourselves a chance to do that.
Yeah, well said. And I think, as you pointed out, it really starts with you and Danny in the yard, right? It's not like you're having to go on a safari to Africa to build this connection. You're literally starting with the poison ivy in your yard, right? The yellow
Yeah.
jackets in your yard. And I think that's one thing all of the people listening to this should remember. We're not going for the grand experience here. We're going for slow and steady building relationships, 12 to 18 minutes a day kind of a thing with the beings that are right around you. And then, I think you spoke earlier beautifully to passion, and which really starts with curiosity, right? It's like nurture your curiosity. What is the little bird that hangs out on your patio? You don't have to know what species it is or its Latin name, but get to know that being as an individual, and build those relationships over time and let those little threads grow into strings, into cords, into ropes, right? But I was saying that the burden of the legacy, so to speak, like I have to make sure this is passing down to the next generation. And when I perceive you, Josh, and you, Aiden, and you, Sarah, I'm like, I don't have to worry. You guys are such role models for integrating this into yourselves and doing it in your way and moving it forward through time. And for that, I'm feeling really, really grateful. The depth of your experience is just resonating out through your words and your heart. And I really appreciate it. And I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about the book, Conscious Nature, Josh, and a little bit about what you're doing here in the world now.
Thank you. Yeah. And thanks for passing this forward. And I don't feel it as a burden, but I feel it as a gift. I feel it as a gift, and sharing it, I feel a great gift in that. And I'm really dedicated to doing that. And it's great to see the light that rises up in people when that process happens. So whether we're tracking around us or tracking those things inside of ourselves and understanding them and finding more resource inside of ourselves that we may not have known was there. So thank you. In terms of conscious nature, part of it arose, I think I was in one of Tom Brown's classes maybe a decade ago. It was The Power of Story. And he made an offhand comment that, maybe somebody someday will pull together some research supporting all this stuff we're doing, And I was thinking about that in terms of our work at Eight Shields as well. And being a mentor, like seeing first how mentoring impacted me in my life, and then sharing that with others as a mentor, seeing these transformations happen again and again. I got curious. I wanted to know what the heck's going on inside of our brain, inside of our neurobiology, And then that later led to other questions too about our energy on the energetic side of things, and the intuitive side. But I started with, looking at the research. I spent about 2.5 years gathering all kinds of research journals, from neuroscience to education and brain-based coaching and all kinds of things, and looked at the core routines that we work with and how do they match up. What's going on under the hood when we apply these routines of mentoring for ourselves, for people we work with. And so the book really goes through that, and I tried to make it in a lighthearted way because I'm a bit of a trickster and jokester at times, and it's a fun read, and it's also an autobiography, I would say, of that first leg of my connection journey and that desire to interweave the mystical, you could say, with the scientific, and just see how and where do they dovetail, how do they support each other, and then what are the insights we can find through that. So there's a mix of qigong practices, or some breathing and meditation and energetic insights in there, as well as insights from the tracking journey and how to get into that. But then also what's happening in your brain and being when you do these things, the benefits of that and the science behind that. So it was a lot of fun to put together, and it helped me connect the dots and kind of get a bigger appreciation for what's happening in this work when we do this on that deep level. And my intention is for it to be a resource for people who are either interested in mindfulness but wonder about nature and how to tie that together, or vice versa. If you have some nature background already, and want to go deeper into the mindfulness and the inner side of things, to make a bridge for that.
Well, thank you for that work. And I wonder if, Sarah, you have any reflections here as we draw to a close here today with Josh.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious, what would it have been if you didn't weave in nature into mindfulness? Could it have even been? But where would you be? How would it be different?
My sense is that as you go deeper into different pathways, you do get to a different state of sensitivity, where I think more dots come together regardless of what path you take. There are certain realizations that do unfold. But the nature piece for me was a precious gem, in the sense of rooting myself in the earth, where I feel at home here. Whereas before I didn't have that. I didn't understand the culture I was being raised in. Felt like it was plopped down, a McDonald's here, a bowling alley here, whatever, like you could do that cookie cutter thing anywhere. But then what is this amazing earth that we're actually springing up out of and part of? And that gave me that sense of being at home, to the point where when we went, John, a decade ago to the Kalahari, or now it's more than that, 11 years ago, we were tracking with some of the Bushman elders, and, looking at the tracks. And the funny thing was, I didn't feel out of place. I literally felt like I was taking a walk in my backyard, doing the things that I do every day, just in a different part of the earth. With people who've been doing that, since the beginning of time, but it felt like just what I do in my backyard. And so that's the gift, I think, is just feeling at home, and then recognizing that gift and asking, well, what can I do? What is my role? What can I offer to help that connection reach more people? Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
Yeah, Josh, thank you for sharing all of this. This has been a really wonderful conversation, and it's sort of re-inspired me, to treasure those little moments of connection and presence and silence in the day to day.
Yeah, no, it's really fun to talk with you, Josh. Maybe we'll have you on again for around another topic someday, because I feel like we've just barely tapped the surface of Josh Lane. You getting that feeling? I was thinking about, what I was saying, like that burden of legacy. And I think when you said your reflection on that made me realize, I think what I really feel is a responsibility. Like this was gifted to me in such a beautiful way, and I have to gift it to others. But there's also this other part of me that watches and is like, am I gifting it to others in such a way that they can gift it to others? And I think that would be a clarifying way of saying, how I feel about the three of you, just, seeing who you've all become and what you're doing, and the waves that you're putting out in the world and the people you're touching and helping. It makes me feel very hopeful. And I hope people can find you. We'll put your contact down in our show notes here. because I know you offer mentoring and coaching for people, and you've got that cool book and lots of fun stuff on your web resources. So I do hope if you feel called to find Josh Lane and track him down, that you'll do that, with our highest recommendations. Yeah, thank you so much, Josh.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me here, and again for all the support over the years. And yeah, it's just an honor. I mean, it's just so fun, all the linkages here. I remember Aiden, doing my Kamana response journals 25 years ago when I was, doing my naturalist training experience, and then working with Sarah over the years here, and just seeing what you're offering with tracking, and just seeing this lineage moving through time in so many ways. So it's an honor. And yeah, folks, please do, check out what's going on at consciousnature.net. I do have a free guide with some inner tracking tools that you can download, consciousnature.net/impact. So yeah, put those questions to work, because the questions are what prime our brain to actually reach out, and our dendrites literally start to reach out when we ask a good question, and they start to look for the answers. And so we can apply that inside ourselves to really open up some potential in our pathways for what we want to create intentionally in our lives. And yeah, I invite you to put those resources to use for yourself. And thanks so much for having me here. It's a real honor.
Ours too.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks for what you're bringing.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for listening to Tracking Connections. You can find everything related to the podcast and our current offerings at trackingconnections.net. We'll see you next time.